All right, welcome in. I'm the Kodiak, and welcome back to, I guess, this new series I'm doing where I'm ranking stuff 1 through 32 as far as NFL teams. Obviously, we start from the back, but before we get into it, leave a like if you enjoy, subscribe if you're not already. Let's dive right into it. So, thinking about the Commanders, and we're going to start with guys who are unranked. We're going to start with the 4 guys who have not GM'd in the NFL this year or before, and they're now taking the reins of NFL front offices. So, this will be pretty interesting to see how they do, but we're going to start with Adam Peters for the Washington Commanders. So, what he did when he took the reins from this team, it symbolizes that he was not happy with how this roster was built. And frankly, I can't blame him. Rivera was a lame duck, and they pretty much had to overhaul the entire roster because, there's culture problems. They added guys like Zach Ertz and Bobby Wagner. But what I will say is the Dan Quinn hire is not that exciting, especially because of the other candidates that were potentially available during this hiring cycle, and they've gotten to that mudslinging match with Ben Johnson, and I don't really understand what happened there. But um, your expectations should be that Dan Quinn is what you thought Ron Rivera was going to be. He's a guy who can just come in, rebuild your culture, and then in 3 years, when you miss the playoffs just barely, you fire him, and then you get that coach to take you over the hump. But they did draft Jaden Daniels, and uh, I'm interested to see how he does because I'm less confident in his success at the NFL level than May or Caleb Williams. But I do expect him to be pretty good still, and yeah, hopefully he is for the Commanders' sake. Now, what I will say is temper your expectations year one for the Commanders. They're not that good of a team, at least roster-wise. There are a lot of new faces there, and sometimes they take time. They can take time to gel. Look at the Lions a few years ago. But yeah, so when you're playing against the Cowboys and the Eagles twice a year, you already know you have your work cut out for you. Except the Commanders have been pretty competitive in those games. But regardless, the question I have about Peters is how much influence did he have in San Francisco or Denver? Because between Peters and Quinn, like fine, you can take Peters and live with Dan Quinn. You can be excited about Peters and live with Dan Quinn. But the thing about Peters is he was always atop the list of potential GM candidates over the past few years regarding NFL teams. So it remains to be seen how much influence he actually had in San Francisco and Denver. If I recall, since I do follow Denver, he was actually a director of college scouting from 2014 to 2016, and none of those drafts were that special. But I don't know; it still remains to be seen what he actually did with the team and how he does with the Commanders. Thought the first draft went pretty well, so good for him. Now, with the Panthers and Dan Morgan, I really thought they could have used some blood outside the organization. And the one thing we also have to consider is he making the picks or is Tepper? Because Tepper spent a lot of money on this team and he's been very involved with the community and he's almost been a little too hands on. And, there's been legal troubles and lawsuits, but regardless, after they fired Scott Fitterer, who completely rebuilt the Bears organization all by himself and has been getting fleeced left and right, making terrible draft picks. Uh, I don't know. It was just time for something else outside the organization, at least I thought. I didn't like the Xavier Legette pick as far as what he did in this year's draft. I thought he's way too similar to Mingo. I actually called him Mingo 2.0 in a video I did, but there's some stuff to be excited about. This team's defense is relatively good, and hopefully they play that well again, especially with Ejiro Evero running the defense. As you know, I'm sure you all can remember the 2022 Broncos. Bad head coach, great defense, and that was off the back of Evero. So hopefully that they can get it going again. I did like their attempts to build around Young this offseason. They added Hunt, they added another O-lineman, they also added Deontay Johnson. So yeah, and the NFC South is also a relatively weak division, but it's kind of a wait and see thing. I don't really expect them to do that well this year, but they do have all their picks again next year, just in case in the event that they do end up failing. Hopefully, Bryce Young can be the player that they thought they were getting when they drafted him. Again, as I said in my video yesterday, not pushing the panic button on Bryce Young, but not encouraged with what I've seen so far. So, Elliott Wolf. This is another guy that I'm not sure how much influence he actually had in this year's draft, but there are some things that are completely impossible to ignore when you think about what New England is going with philosophy-wise. They have a lot of new skill position players, so long gone are the days of overpaying Devontae Parker and Jonnu Smith and Nelson Aguilar in free agency. They drafted Jalen Polk, Javon Baker, and they already had good weapons there, such as uh, Pop Douglas, and Kendrick Bourne was their wide receiver one this past year. And they finally took value in the draft. I know that Bill Belichick really liked to trade down. I know that he really liked to deviate from consensus. And over the past few years or so, it has proven that he was not correct in his process. But this new regime, the fact that they are a new regime, it is night and day the difference from what they've normally done in the draft and what I would have expected Belichick to do. And that's good because I don't think anybody from the Patriots over the past 3 or 4 years leading up to this year should have been involved with what they did in this year's draft. And the defense should be left in a relatively good spot. You're going to get Seagon back. You're going to get Barmore. Um, just a lot of cohesion on that side of the ball, but that's what comes with playing with Bill Belichick. They were in some low-scoring games last year, but ultimately, when you don't have a respectable offense, what kind of defense do you really need to play against the Patriots? I don't know. I guess that remains to be seen, but we'll see how Mayo does as first-time head coach. There's new blood all around the organization. Looking forward to how they're going to do, especially because most of my friends are Patriots fans, since I talk to a lot of people on the East Coast. And now the last one, Joe Ortiz. When I think about what he did in this year's draft, everybody expected them to go Malik Neighbors, but the days leading up to the draft books and the Vegas odds really caught up to what they were going to do, and I believe Joe Wall and J.C. Latham were both even odds to be their first pick, and that kind of surprised me. There was some rumors going around that J.C. Latham was going to be their first overall or their first round pick, and I would have absolutely been like, wow, classic Chargers. But Joe Wall, he was a great pick. I know that he's never played on the right side before, and Slater is a left tackle, but Joe Wall is a great prospect, and he really fits with what Harbaugh wants to do. He fits with how Harbaugh is going to build this team, similar to how Michigan was built when they were chasing national championships. So, yeah. And as far as Joe Wall and Lad McConkey, that's a better combo than Malik Neighbors and whatever offensive lineman you were getting at 35, because time and time again, this team has let down Herbert. And what is more sticky? What's more stable? It's the offensive line rather than a group of receiving weapons. So the one thing I am concerned about, or not concerned about, but curious about, is who calls the shots. Is it him or Harbaugh? Was it him or Harbaugh this draft? And my guess is that Harbaugh had final say, but Ortiz did everything he could. He was just basically like a glorified scout. I think next year and a few years down the line, Ortiz will be more involved in the decision making. And the only real other thing they did was trade away Keenan. And it made complete sense. It made sense for what they wanted to do at the time. And I liked what they did in the draft, even in the later rounds. Um, adding Kamani Vidal in particular was one of my favorite pickups of the draft. And now their offense is getting run by Greg Roman, so this team is going to run the heck out of the ball. Gus Edwards may legitimately get the rock 400 times next year. So now we have our actual teams, our actual GMs that I believe I can feasibly rank just based on the body of work and what they've done. And where do I start with George Paton and the Denver Broncos? So this team's roster was graded as the worst in the league by PFF. And when Paton was starting out here, the 2021 draft was an absolute masterclass. He took Patrick Surtain when everybody was saying, oh, you got to take Justin Fields. When are you going to have a chance at drafting a potential franchise quarterback like this? But Justin Fields is now worth a 2025 sixth round pick, and Patrick Surtain is one of the best young corners in the league. But nothing after that has encouraged me with this roster building. He drafted Justin Fields. He drafted Quinn Miners. He drafted Baron Browning, all three of whom have been great contributors. Javonte Williams looked really good before his injury too, but you could argue that he kind of screwed up there. But oh well, I thought the 2021 draft was absolutely incredible from George Paton. After they had traded for Russell Wilson and were devoid of capital, nothing, almost nothing they did was good. Puzzling picks in the late rounds, bad free agent signings like Randy Gregory, Mike McGlinchey, and DJ Jones are all relatively overpaid to what they offered. Randy Gregory is not even on the team anymore. He was cut because the Broncos decided to part ways with a lot of toxic veterans. And Mike McGlinchey, I think he'll be better on the right side this year now that they don't have Russell Wilson running into sacks. But still, I think the contract was a little rich. DJ Jones, once again, he was just replacement level last year. The one free agent contract that was actually pretty good was Zach Allen. So I don't know. And if rumors are true, it is widely believed that Nathaniel Hackett was hired just to lure Aaron Rodgers, which if you hired him to lure a 37, 38-year-old quarterback at the time, you were an absolute fool. And I believe that the Broncos organization needs to be held accountable. Now, there's a lot of questions as to if he or Sean Payton is the actual GM. And there's been a lot of guys hired in Denver this past offseason to the point where I wouldn't be surprised if Payton actually isn't the one calling the shots anymore, and he's just more of a glorified just voice in the building. Because they did hire Cody Rager from the Saints. They also hired David Shaw from Stanford to be an executive as well. So the Broncos, they keep adding more positions to their front office scheme, and that's something that, Sean Payton probably wants. It's something that he's probably pitching to new ownership, and new ownership is like, knock yourself out, kid. We have, unlimited money, do whatever the heck you want. But out of all the GMs, I could see the Broncos overperforming this upcoming year, but the chatter surrounding George Payton's job is not going to get any quieter anytime soon. So this is another one. By the way, the Broncos finalists for the 2022 or 2021 GM position were George Payton and Terry Fontenot. Here they are at the bottom of my list. So the problem with Terry Fontenot is that they took a million offensive skill position weapons despite not having a quarterback. And offensive skill position weapons, you could argue that their importance is a lot lower than it has been, because you've seen Patrick Mahomes be able to win with complete scrubs at wide receiver over the past 2 years, and they took a running back 8th overall. They took Kyle Pitts 4th overall in draft classes that were loaded at other positions to where they could have gotten solid value, but even when they did make their quarterback position decisions, I didn't like what they did. You can look back at my channel when they drafted Desmond Ridder. There's literally a video on my channel called "Desmond Ridder is Bad" from I think it was actually before the draft in 2022. But I didn't like Desmond Ridder at all. I thought Sam Howell or Matt Corral, even though he's out of the league, were better picks there. But Mariota, he was supposed to be a backup at best, but he ended up getting some starting reps, which. Or actually, he was supposed to be a starter, but he ended up sucking so bad that he was, I don't know. I don't even know what to call him. He was a bridge holder for their 3rd round rookie quarterback. Didn't like the Penix pick either. Would have definitely preferred Nix or McCarthy there, but we'll see how it goes. What I will say is that the defense has gotten a lot better since he took over. The defense with Dan Quinn was really bad, and there were a lot of contracts that he had to shed, like in particular Matt Ryan and Julio Jones. He had the task of getting rid of both of those guys, I believe, within the same offseason. If not within the same offseason, at least one apart. I can't remember when Julio Jones went to the Titans, but Terry Fontenot, what has saved him is he has made some great free agency pickups like Caden Ellis, Jesse Bates was a home run, Onyemata as well, coming over from the Saints, but this guy, when they took Penix, he has had some shockingly bad presser quotes. Like, you need to see that video of him interacting with Arthur Blank when they made the Penix pick. And I don't know, the entire look I get on their faces is just that Easter egg island emoji, that, like, I don't know, that stone tiki head emoji. I'm sure you've all seen it. But yeah, so with the Falcons, they've made some good free agency pickups, but yeah, Fontenot has had some very, very I don't know what to call him. So once again, this is a guy who could get better, because ultimately he did sign Cousins, and they do have a new regime with Morris and Robinson as their offensive coordinator, but we'll see. So Trent Baalke, I have no idea how he found another job in the NFL based off of how his time went with the 49ers, and it is very apparent that the Jaguars tax, as they call it, is alive and very well. And what that is, if you're not familiar with it, it's the propensity that bad teams have to overspend on free agents to, lure free agents to come to A, a bad team, and B, an undesirable city like Jacksonville. Even though I think Jacksonville would be pretty cool to visit, but, and no income tax. That's a bonus as well. But, this organization, their bread and butter lies in free agency. They've spent a lot of time luring free agents over the past, I don't know, however they've been bad. But my one question is, why is Press Taylor still in the organization? Doug Peterson is torpedoing his reputation as a head coach just to appease this Press Taylor guy, and it looks like he's going to get play calling duties again. Um, as far as Trent Baalke, there's a lot riding on Trevor Lawrence, and there's a lot riding on the extension that he was given. He made Trevor Lawrence the highest paid player in NFL history at this point, and I mean, highest paid QB in the league, at least as far as average annual value going forward. So 2021, great draft. You had Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne. Even if I didn't believe that Trevor Lawrence was the guy he was, uh, talked up to be coming out of Clemson, he was still probably the pick there at first overall. Travis Etienne, Tyson Campbell, Andre Cisco. You got some great value in the 2021 draft. And in 2022, they made some very questionable decisions. Like, for example, I thought Walker, first overall, was kind of, it was kind of overthinking in my opinion. Like, I think they just should have just taken Hutch, and everything could have gone with it. But that wasn't a good year to have first overall pick, even though I think Lloyd and Walker are both good players. Um, Still, I think Hutch was the pick there. 2023, everything looks not optimistic so far, but BTJ picked this past year. We'll see how it goes from there. So, Joe Douglas. Now, oh, one more thing I want to talk about Trent Baalke. I do not like how he talks to the media. I do not like how he throws players under the bus. I do not talk about how he brags about his job security despite the horrible job he does. So Joe Douglas, I do, spoiler alert, I do have the other New York GM right ahead of him, and you'll see why. Because even though I think Joe Douglas has acquired, you know, more talent, aggregated, like condensed into if who I think Joe Douglas or Joe Shane is a better, pure talent evaluator. I think Joe Douglas is a horrible team builder. You are your record in the NFL. Look at that, 27-56 since taking over in 2019. And I'm not going to check that, but I'd venture to say that that is probably the worst in the NFL over that span. They have not made the playoffs in all 5 years as a GM, and that is 3 years of uh, expanded playoffs where half the conference makes the playoff. So he can build a defense. There is no doubt about that. He can evaluate front seven talent like no other. Him and Salah are definitely cohesive when it comes to that, and they built a great secondary as well. But the offensive, what has really hampered Joe Douglas in his pursuits of building the Jets and making them into a championship team, as he was hired from the Philadelphia Eagles in 2019 to do for the Jets, is they have not gotten right at the quarterback position. They gave Donald a shot in 2019. He got mono. He really didn't develop into the quarterback that they thought they were getting. So they took Zach Wilson second overall. You all know how that went by now. But they've made improve. They've tried at least to get everything correct. And sorry if you guys heard that. That was my cat. Oh, I guess we just spoiled the next two as well. But hey, buddy. Okay, so they've tried with the offensive line. They've drafted Elijah Vera Tucker. They've drafted Mekhi Becton, and Elijah Vera Tucker. He is a good player, but Mekhi Becton, I don't really know. Signed Smith this past year as well, but it really hasn't worked out with McGovern either. Van Rotten as well. So Adam Gase, I have no idea how he slipped through the cracks, kind of like Nathaniel Hackett. I have no idea how he slipped through the cracks of this organization's hiring process. So one thing I will commend him for, offensive skill position evaluation, not bad at all. Brees Hall is about as situation proof as you could ask for, and Garrett Wilson is one of the game's premier young wide receivers. And if this team had not moved off of Sam Darnold and Jamal Adams, they would probably be a lot more barren with capital. So I guess they are, I should give them credit for knowing when to move off of Jamal Adams and Sam Darnold. But yeah, and unfortunately, I do think Woody Johnson is making Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh cater to Aaron Rodgers. They're signing scrubs like Randall Cobb and Alan Lazard just to appease him. But yeah, once again, I think Joe Douglas, as a talent evaluator, I think he's completely fine, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Team builder, not really a fan of what he's done in New York. 24, Giants, Joe Shane. Now, what puts Shane above Joe Douglas, in my opinion, is that Joe Shane has actually won a playoff game. And that is something that Joe Douglas cannot say because even though the Giants' playoff one was kind of Mickey Mouse, it came against Ed Donatello's defense. It came against Ed Donatello's defense. Let me look this up. I believe so. Okay, yes. So um, that arguably set them back because they had to extend Daniel Jones after that. And he inherited a roster from Dave Gettleman that had some nuggets alongside of it. It had Dexter Lawrence. It had the extra pick in the 2022 draft from the Chicago Bears after they traded up for Justin Fields. But he built a defensive line that should be good. So he drafted Kayvon Thibodeau. They traded for Brian Burns again. They also had Dexter Lawrence in waiting. They've added some other front seven talent, Bobby Okereke in particular, and Deontay Banks. So I think he's done a good job on the offensive side of the ball. Evan Neal was a bad pick, but Neal was a highly rated prospect, so I can't really fault him for how badly he's flamed out in New York. Waller, once again, that's kind of an ouch. Oof. But anyway, I do have faith that he can turn him around. Malik Neighbors, good pick in the first round this year. And Tyler Nubin, I don't know. We'll see what happens there. But I'm kind of a fan of what they're doing. I think that ultimately Jones is not the guy, but we'll see what they do next offseason. And that's probably going to determine where I have them on my rankings. So with the Raiders, I don't know how the Raiders watched the Chargers get blown out like 70 to like 10 or whatever it was on Thursday Night Football this year, and they were just like, yes, we want that. We want the guy who built that team coming over to our side. So Tom Telesco, he makes the 5-hour drive from LA to Vegas, and what he's doing is he's building a good team, but unfortunately, the Raiders or the Chargers under Telesco have never really been an organization that's been known to hit on picks late. In fact, he's actually pretty infamous for not hitting on those picks late, but he drafted Keenan Allen, Joey Bosa, Derwin James, and Justin Herbert, and then you look at the rest of the track record, and it's not that good. As far as other first-round picks that he's had, notably over his tenure with the Chargers, Quinn Johnston, Kenneth Murray, Jerry Tillery, not good whatsoever. But what they are doing in Vegas, here in Vegas, what they are doing at quarterback this year, they're treading water. They're probably going to roll with Aiden O'Connell, but we'll see. We'll see how him and Minshew stack up. But there have been some gems that they've acquired in free agency, but also an equal amount of disasters. Like for example, for every J.C. Jackson, there was a Hayward. So good for them in that regard, but he did fail to build around Herbert before the big extension, and he could also never figure it out a head coach. He kept Staley for way too long, and I don't know. I just don't really know where we go from here. Anthony Lynn looked like he was a promising head coach, but I don't know. I don't know where we go from here. So Mickey Loomis. This is one where I just think new blood outside the organization would help. There's another team I have in this tier that might surprise you guys as well. But I'm not sure what this guy does and what he does not do within the organization because the best tenure, or his best track record with the Saints has been when he's had good resources around him, like Jeff Ireland, Drew Brees, and Sean Payton. And he deserves credit for turning around the Saints and making them a respectable organization again and making them a place where players actually want to come and play and, rebuilding a very passionate football town. But ultimately, they're a very good drafting and developing team. At least they have been. They haven't been as lucky as late, but ultimately, this is still a team that can develop its talent pretty well. But the problem with kicking the can down the road is that you cannot sign guys in free agency. And the guys they have signed in free agency, like Brandon Browner from the Seahawks and Bird, who came over in 2014, absolute disastrous signings, and a big reason as to why the Saints could never figure it out in their secondary for like 5 years. The Derek Carr contract is also horrible. They don't really have a way to move off of it unless Rattler or Hayner can just somehow break out, which would be outliers. But this guy's been tenured for pretty long. I do think an organizational switch in philosophy would be beneficial to a lot involved, but as long as Benson's owning the Saints, nothing's going to change. So I know you guys are surprised to see this one. This is a new blood would help tier as well. So they completely blew their window with Allen on a rookie contract. They were good at drafting early on in Bean's tenure, but after that, they were not. Uh, they had really whiffed in the second, third, fourth round, and that's why they're not on par with the Chiefs. That's why they're not on par with the Ravens. Heck, that's why I expect the Bengals to 100% like affirmatively pass them, and they arguably have, considering that they've defeated the Bills in one of their playoff runs, and the year before the Bengals made the Super Bowl and got really close to winning, which is something the Bills have not done either. But they've just blew their window with Allen on a rookie contract. They made the AFC Championship after he had his huge breakout, but ever since then, they've gone backwards. They made it to the divisional round the year after, the divisional round again, then the divisional round, and they lost. They keep losing, and this whole organization should be on the hot seat. I do think that Brandon Beane should look elsewhere at head coach. But as far as what he has done for this organization, he does deserve his props for drafting Josh Allen and developing him. Give some credit to Dable with the assist on that one too. He traded for Diggs when Diggs was a diva in Minnesota, and um, yeah, I don't know. So good for him in that regard because they did get a lot of use out of Diggs, and I don't think Josh Allen develops without him, but they do also do a really good job of extending the core pieces. It's not like Buffalo is a hard place to get free agents to play anymore, but as far as run game, this team has never really had one that was good. Um, they finally were able to get good usage out of the running backs in this past year with James Cook, but I don't know. And one of my questions for him is, does he look somewhere besides McDermott? Because after the 12 men on the field game this year on Monday Night Football, uh, they fired Dorsey, and honestly, I thought that was a wrong move. I thought they were just using him as a scapegoat, but the Bills started winning right after that, so I don't know. I do think that McDermott plays scared when it's crunch time, and I don't know. I don't know. But Omar Khan, this is one that's really tough to judge because we have one season of work off him and we have one draft. Or so we have two drafts and one complete season of work. He's managed the Tomlin situation pretty well. I know that a lot of people want him fired for like 90% of the year, and then they somehow make the playoffs and then they lose. But yeah, so he acquired both Fields and Russell Wilson this past year. They were linked to both. The Steelers were linked to both QBs, and he managed to get both of them. So good on Russ for being a mentor to Justin Fields. But yeah, he was left with a roster that's been relatively overperforming. I can't even remember who the past Steelers GM was. I think it was Colbert. And uh, I don't know. He shipped off Deontay Johnson this past year. Maybe Deontay was just unhappy with where he was at in Pittsburgh, but I don't know. Deontay's a good wide receiver, so I was a little surprised. But my other thing is, what made you decide to go out and get Allen Robinson? I mean, I don't know. That was interesting. But even then, they've made some pretty good choices in the draft. I'm pretty pleased with what they've done so far, and you should be if you're a Steelers fan. Obviously, you don't have the big piece to the puzzle figured out, but you're getting better up front. You're getting better on the O-line. You're getting better at positions of importance. In particular, they drafted Jones for their offensive line and Joey Porter Jr., Fatanu, Frazier, and Wilson, all in the top 3 rounds this past year. So this is another one where he's a tough eval, but we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. So Rand Carthen, he came over from the 49ers. He was their director of player personnel for I believe a couple years, and then he went out and made multiple moves that supported Will Levis being their quarterback of the future. Now, he found a quarterback that they're going to give a shot to being a franchise quarterback early in round 2. And I'm not a Levis guy, but what did I think about Levis is irrelevant. What I thought about him as a prospect or what I think about of him as a player now is irrelevant when I'm doing this like GM ranking. And the fact that he was able to get a guy who was projected by many to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, that was pretty good. So props to Rand Carthen on that. But they've rebuilt the O-line. They've at least made an attempt to rebuild the O-line by drafting Latham and signing Cushenberry this past free agency. But they also acquired Tony Pollard, Calvin Ridley, L'Jarius Sneed, and Lloyd Cushenberry in free agency this past year. So once again, this kind of just symbolizes that they are, giving somebody their opportunity to be a franchise quarterback. Sometimes this works, like Jalen Hurts. Sometimes it doesn't, like Drew Lock. But I like what they've done. I like the Skronsky pick. Tajay Spears is someone I really like as a receiving back as well. I thought he was going to have a crazy year before they signed Pollard. And yeah, I like the Sweat pick as well. Get some help for Jeffrey Simmons on the defensive line. Yeah, so this team's kind of at a crossroads. It still does need maybe another piece or two in the secondary or on the front seven, but overall, pretty good job so far from Ryan Carthen. But Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, the Vikings have just had the most Vikings past 2 seasons ever. That's the only way I can describe it. So the jury is still out. He's in my jury still out tier, along with Omar Khan and I just talked about him. Why am I spacing on his name? Ryan Carthen. So the Vikings, when Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah got this team in 2022, they were kind of a team with a lot of aging and bad and mid contracts. I expected them to be a good team. I've always expected them to be a good team, but sometimes it just doesn't pan out. And they had a magical year in 2022. Kevin O'Connell was a great hire by the Minnesota Vikings. 2 days after the Rams won the Super Bowl, they hired Kevin O'Connell. And, from a descendant of a Shanahan scheme, from a descendant of McVay, that made sense at the time. So good for them. And one thing about Adolfo-Mensah that sticks out to me is that teams oftentimes will not trade within the division. But look what the Vikings get. They get TJ Hawkinson. They trade down with Green Bay so that Green Bay can get Christian Watson, and I don't know. But their draft in 2022 was not that good. Cine and Booth, yikes. But 2023 looks much better, especially with Addison leading the way. But they were really unlucky with their quarterback situation last year, but they did a pretty solid job of managing it, even though, the Dobbs insanity run kind of ran out of time. But Jaron Hall started, and my God, was that a disaster. But they did extend Justin Jefferson, and they did draft J.J. McCarthy this past year alongside Dallas Turner. So they are going high upside within this draft. And honestly, they need to. This is going to be a very competitive division. And one thing that I think Adolfo-Mensah deserves credit for is that this defense turned around real quick in 2023 after they got rid of Ed Donatel. So getting rid of him was addition by subtraction. And then Brian Flores blitzed like 90% of the time, and it ended up working. So, yeah, overall, we still need to see a little more, but I'm pretty encouraged with what I've seen so far. So this is someone who's had a lot of opportunity, at least early on, because the Cardinals have picked pretty high over the past 2 years. And when he took over this team, he inherited Steve Keim and Cliff Kingsbury's absolute disaster of a regime and organization. But he had Kyler Murray, so it was all good. And the team has been, bad early. So as I put in my slideshow, Monty gets to cook. But the team played very hard for Jonathan Gannon. They played very tough against some teams. Everybody thought they were going to go 0-17 because we didn't know when Kyler was coming back. We didn't know what the situation was for this organization. We didn't understand what the situation was, for this roster in general. And they were bad, but they definitely weren't as hopeless as we thought. There are a lot of videos out there of Monty Ossenfort wheeling and dealing during the 2023 draft. Those are pretty good when they trade down from 3 and have the Texans go up for Will Anderson. But yeah, I think they have earned our trust with skill position guys early, because not only do they have MHJ, but they drafted Trey Benson and Michael Wilson. And by the way, week 10 to 18, after Kyler came back, they had the best run game in the league. So interesting little tidbits there. But yeah, overall, very encouraged with what I've seen so far. So these are guys that have a more of a body of work for us to judge them. And we begin with Chris Ballard. And this team feels like it should be in a better spot than it actually is, because, Chris Ballard, I remember when he was first jamming in the league in 2017, in 2018, everyone was like, oh my God, Chris Ballard's amazing. Like, he's the next guy. He's up next. But it really has not panned out, at least not yet. Like, the Colts haven't made any deep playoff runs, and part of that was due to Luck retiring, and they had some pretty bad luck with that one, no pun intended. But they've also had too many Band-Aids at quarterback, and last year, I'm glad they said enough and finally drafted Anthony Richardson. So when they had Phillip Rivers, Carson Wentz, and Matt Ryan, they were just duct taping solutions together at quarterback, and honestly, I don't know. Minshew is probably the best quarterback play they've gotten since 2018. They also have Brissett, but Brissett, he's a high-end backup for a reason. But Chris Ballard, he's a good skill position evaluator. JT was an absolute home run of a pick. Michael Pittman Jr. as well. That same draft, only 8 picks apart. Good for them. A.D. Mitchell and Josh Downs as well. Josh Downs had a very impressive year. Jelani Woods, we haven't seen a lot from him yet, but he's still somebody that I'm excited about. Evan Hull I think he missed all of last year due to injury, but yeah. And this team is high upside. So Chris Ballard has never really built this team he's never really built a team like he has, um, or at least has that one that has had the identity that this current Colts team has. But Jesus, that was a lot for me to say. That was a mouthful. But uh, once again, there's a lot of cap space that I feel like this team never does anything with. I feel like in the offseason, they always have like 60, 70 million to work with, and they don't do anything with it. But yeah, they poured quite a few resources into the D line actually, but overall the trenches for this team is usually good, and it just remains to be seen as to what else can happen with uh, the Colts in 2024. Now we get to the Seahawks and we get to John Schneider. Now, he rebuilt Seattle with Pete Carroll. He completely turned around the Legion of Boom, and they've always been a competitive team. Like, even if they haven't been true threats for titles, like 2022, they made the playoffs, and I don't know, I just don't know if many people had expected that. But last year, regression kind of hit them pretty hard. Um, Sorry, my cat's under me. um, Anyway, but they've always been a competitive team. They've not been afraid to deviate from consensus during the draft, and they've made some pretty like appalling reaches. But I don't know. Overall, the Seahawks have been a pretty good draft and develop team, and they should have won a lot more with Russell Wilson. But as we've seen, Russell Wilson is kind of limited, even though he played absolutely unbelievable in his prime. Uh, they still relied on the run game a lot to protect him, and ultimately he probably was a little limited. And Pete Carroll does have his fingerprints over the mid 2000s Seahawks after they moved on from the Legion of Boom, probably more so than we originally thought. But ultimately, Schneider's a pretty good GM, and he built one of the best defenses ever. But he can definitely build a secondary with Tariq Woolen and Devon Witherspoon. Um, yeah, that's basically my thoughts about him. Uh, they have really struggled to build an offensive line throughout his tenure, but I hope that's going to change. I think just philosophically they weren't doing a lot that was working in Seattle there, but I do expect things to get better with McDonald and Grubb. This is a team that could instantly, even with the same roster as last year, I'm expecting this team to be really, really good next year. So, yeah, this one's a little tough for me to talk about because I genuinely do not know where he is. Because on one hand, you look at all the stuff off the field, you look at tampering charges, you look at how they wanted to get rid of Tua, you look at how they wanted to recruit Deshaun Watson in the middle of the year. You think about how Brian Flores was a confirmed asshole while he was the head coach of the Miami Dolphins. But Chris Greer, there has been a lot of turmoil within the team, but this was the NFLPA's number one team to play for, so that does speak for something. And honestly, I get it. Like, uh, even though Ross was voted as an A plus for an owner, I could see how Miami would be a great place to play as a player. Fun city, no income tax. Yeah, either way, I think that'd be a great place to if I was young and had a bunch of money to live. But um, I've been impressed with how he's acquired guys in recent years, like Tua, Tyreek, Waddle, Chubb, Holland, A-Chain, Hunt, Ramsey, X, and so many more. But one thing they haven't really been able to do is they haven't really been able to A, build an offensive line, and B, they haven't been able to win the big game or be good in the cold. And Tua is a good player. He is going to be the highest paid quarterback in the league shortly after Trevor Lawrence got his extension, which that's going to be a big yikes because he's good, but he's unfortunately not good enough. And Mike McDaniel, he is a good coach. He dials up some insane offensive concepts, and you can tell that he uses speed as a weapon. But other things, talking about Chris Greer, I mean, he's fine. He is what he is, but I don't know. I just think that the Dolphins have a lot of upside, which kind of puts them over Ballard and Schneider, in my opinion. So this is one where I'm going to get into the guys that I view positively pretty much no matter what. Now, Andrew Berry, he is already the longest GM in Browns history, if you can't believe that. And he was recruited in 2020 to be a part of the Cleveland Browns. I can't remember exactly where he came over from, but if I had to guess, if I had to take a wild guess, was it Seattle? I don't know. I can't really remember, but he's the GM and longest GM in Browns history, so good for him. He did end up just getting an extension only a few weeks ago, so props to him for that as well. And what we can gather from this is that Deshaun was not his idea. It was Jimmy Haslam's idea, and getting rid of Baker Mayfield, it was Stefanski and Barry's idea. It was not a bad process. The league overall was down on Baker in 2022 when they did decide to get rid of him, but yeah, they replaced him with Deshaun Watson, which nothing about that has been good, but they also have been willing and dealing as far as trades. Amari Cooper, Smith as well to shore up their edge room, but they have had an issue of overpaying. Like for example, I don't think the Elijah Moore acquisition has worked out yet, and I'm interested to see how Judy works out. I'm interested to see if he's what the Browns actually thought they were getting, or what they thought he could be as a prospect. But yeah, I know that there's been a few interesting draft picks here, like Jedrick Wills and Anthony Schwartz, but there have been a lot of studs on this team. And this team, even with Deshaun playing the way he has, and even with Joe Flacco starting at QB, this team was able to go deep into the playoffs. And for a team that was pretty much, I think it's been forgotten, long forgotten, that they were one of the most miserable NFL franchises for a long time before they finally ended up becoming, what we all thought they could be when they started making all their good moves. But yeah, I do really like Barry as a team builder. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, Greg Newsome, DeWand and Emerson have both been great acquisitions, have all been great acquisitions for the Browns, teaming up with Myles Garrett on that defense. Obviously, Jones on the offensive line as well. But yeah, pretty savvy executive, if I do say so myself. So this is one where I really struggle because this is the most valuable sports franchise ever, and Jerry Jones does deserve some credit for that. He's done a lot for the NFL as an owner, and I can't really group that in with a GM, but it's kind of impossible to ignore. He made the Cowboys the most valuable franchise on earth, even more valuable than a lot of other global phenomenons, even more valuable than the Dodgers, the Lakers, Real Madrid, and they are the most valuable sports franchise by $2 billion. And you're always going to be under a microscope when you're America's team, even though a lot of people hate the Cowboys. But this team always seems pretty top heavy. They seem great at finding talent, especially on the top ends. But even late into the draft, they did find Dak Prescott in the 4th round in 2016. Who else did they find? Bland and Diggs. Late in their drafts, even though I know Diggs was a 2nd round pick. But the identity of this team shifts constantly because I feel like one thing is certain. I feel like some NFC team always goes into Jerry World and they're always overmatched, and the Cowboys always end up putting 50 points on them. But this team has had a lot of playoff meltdowns, and you could blame Jerry Jones for not being able to get over the hump, and he's loyal to a fault. He has kept Mike McCarthy and Jason Garrett for a lot longer than he's needed to, and I don't know. I don't know how I feel about Jerry Jones as a GM because on one hand, the Cowboys win a lot. They win and they look very good during the season in a lot of cases, but I don't know. I really don't know. So now we're going into the GMs where I really respect the job they've done here. And when Ryan Poles got this job, the team was left in the absolute dumpster by Pace and Nagy. They didn't have their 1st round pick, and they were looking for a new coach. But Matt Eberflus, he was kind of concerning. But the McCaskies, if reports are true, they only gave Poles a handful of people to actually choose from to be the head coach for the NFL team. But they did their best to give Fields a shot last year. They tried to build around him. They tried to, beef up the offensive line. They tried to acquire DJ Moore. But one thing that sticks out to me as far as Poles' tenure so far is he has managed this Caleb situation masterfully. And it all started with trading out of number 1 last year because I guess they weren't in love with any of the Stroud, Young, or A-Rich guys. So when you were in that position, and honestly, it was a pretty easy position for them to be in. especially because it was a QB-rich draft. They probably don't get that haul if Stroud, Young, and Richardson aren't in the draft. But regardless, they did set a pretty hefty price, and Carolina paid it. Carolina paid it, and they came out of that with DJ Moore and Caleb Williams and a lot of other guys, a lot of other great pieces to build their football team. Now, this team got a lot better in the second half of the year, so good for them on that. But they did rebuild their offensive line as well. The only one left over from the Pace and Nagy regime is Tevin Jenkins, but otherwise they've added Darnell Wright, Davis, Jones, and Bates. And the only real fumble they had was the Chase Claypool trade. And the Bayless Jones selection was also, I thought it was an interesting day 2 selection and didn't really do much as a rookie and hasn't really done much throughout his NFL career so far. But trading their second away from Montez Sweat, it basically saved their season. It basically, I don't really know how to describe it, but it invigorated some life into the Bears. And it really allowed their defense to play very well down the stretch, especially with guys like Jalen Johnson. And I don't know. I'm just really interested to see what the Bears do and how all this experiment ages, because this is pretty much like if a Madden player got a hold of an NFL team. And it's kind of envious because on one hand, if it pans out, you look like a genius. On the other hand, if Caleb Williams and Romo Dunze can't, bring a winning season to Chicago, then I don't know, you probably get fired if you end up missing on that. But another GM I really respect, we're going a little east of Chicago, is to Cincinnati, is Duke Tobin. And I don't really know how much he's played a part into building the Cincinnati Bengals, because I think his role has changed a little bit since he has been with the Bengals. But they've built 3 Super Bowl contenders in 3 different eras. They had Carson Palmer, and unfortunately, that was derailed by a QB injury. And then they had Andy Dalton as well. That was also derailed by a QB injury. And they did build the Joe Burrow Bengals, who are now, I believe, one of the best teams in the league. But one thing that happens to the Bengals is that they are underratedly stable. They don't really have a lot of turnover as far as who their quarterback is, who their head coach is. And I guess that's good. I guess that's good philosophy-wise, but the NFL is a "why have you done for me lately" league, and there have been times where I thought Zach Taylor could be on the hot seat, but when Mike Brown is your owner, there's only so much you can make up for, and I guarantee Mike Brown does have his ear in some of the guys. He does have his ear in some of the guys who are working in the front office, but regardless, what else? They should have traded Andy Dalton and AJ Green while they still had value. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I don't know why they weren't able to get anything from those guys. I'm glad that Andy Dalton's still in the league, but we'll see. Jamar Oversewell, A+. I know that he got clowned a lot for making that pick when it did happen, including by me. I thought it was absolutely preposterous that you would throw Joe Burrow out there with a bad offensive line, but Jamar Chase does more for the Cincinnati Bengals than any offensive lineman could. That's my hot take. And they revamped the offensive line, but they just haven't been able to click. They haven't been able to stay healthy, and hopefully the Mims acquisition does propel them a step forward this offseason. They've mainly always been a good team, and if not good, they've at least been respectable. I think 2019, when they went 2-14, that was the only year where I was like, yeah, this team is no shot. But regardless, so now we get to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and recruiting Brady in 2024 by Jason Licht, it was not a slam dunk, and I do just want to mention a couple things. He has always kept the Bucs respectable. I know that Jameis didn't really pan out, but that whole draft class was weak, and this team has had to compete against some pretty good Saints teams, some pretty good Falcons teams, and they've always kind of held their own. But what he did in 2020 was an absolute masterclass, because, as I said, recruiting Brady that year was not a slam dunk. He looked kind of washed at the tail end of his career in New England, but, sometimes change of scenery can be best for both sides, and yeah, I don't know. He's acquired and kept some guys lifelong Buccaneers, like he kept Levante David and Mike Evans lifelong Buccaneers, assuming they don't go elsewhere. But this team has always had the talent, but even with Dirk Cotter, they just needed the right coach. They just needed the right guys to succeed in their system. I know they had some Fitz magic going on there in 2018 for a while, which I completely forgot about. I don't know how that just popped into my head, but they were a playoff team with $80 million in dead money. I don't know how that's even possible. Big ups to the Bucs front office for making that happen. I know that the 2016 drafts with Byrne and Hargraves and, just all those guys, I know that everybody wants to talk about those, and I know that Rojo came out of that draft as well. But one thing you just got to realize is that this team, they know what they're doing, and I expect them to be good again. It's always a respectable organization. It looks like they found their quarterback. Uh, Baker Mayfield looks like a castaway. Hold on, I got to hydrate real quick. Woo, that water's hitting. But yeah, so this team is always pretty respectable, and it looks like they found their at least 3-year solution at quarterback with Baker Mayfield. I don't know where Todd Bowles' ceiling is as a quarterback, but yeah. So now we're at Brian Gutekunst, and he did a good job of managing Aaron Rodgers' tomfoolery. I remember after they hired Matt LaFleur in 2019, Gut called Aaron Rodgers and was like, "You are going to have to, adapt to this new coaching style because of how things ended with Mike McCarthy." But regardless, as far as roster building and roster construction, I thought they did a really good job with their succession plan because even though a lot of people were clowning on them and saying that they absolutely wasted the Jordan Love pick, they're now reaping the rewards, and Jordan Love looks like he is the next great quarterback. He looks like he's the next great quarterback of Green Bay's future. So yeah, the drafting has gotten significantly better over the past few years as well. It wasn't that strong early on in Goot's tenure when he was with the Green Bay Packers, but it's gotten a lot better, especially because they always went defense, or they always go, or actually let's say went, because I know they went with Jordan Morgan in the first round this year, but they always pretty much go defense in the first round. And I'm really curious to see what this team's defense looks like without Joe Barry, because that was addition by subtraction. And yeah, their drafting has gotten better the past few years, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. You've added guys like Christian Watson, Jane Reed, Romeo Dobbs, Dontavion Wicks, Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, and Marshawn Lloyd. That's legitimately 7 offensive skill position weapons that you've drafted in the past 2 years. So complete overhaul there in Green Bay. They've also done a good job revamping their O-line and, moving on from those veterans. Like I know they lost Bakhtiari. I know they also moved on from Balaga a while ago, but I don't know. O-line is always important to that organization. I'm a fan of what they do. I really like what they do, and I'm in on the Packers this year. So the Texans are now one of the favorites for the Super Bowl. They actually have begun their real Super Bowl window. And when Nick Caserio took over this team in 2021, he was inheriting a team with an angry Deshaun Watson. He was inheriting a team that had pretty much no talent anywhere besides the quarterback position, but also the Deshaun situation made it a little more, I don't know how to describe it, just uneasy. And he had good drafts in 2022, and they've only gotten better. They drafted Nico Collins in 2021. They drafted, who else did they draft? I'm blanking on, God, I don't know. I'm going to be mad when I remember who I was thinking of. But yeah, but last year was when they really hit it out of the park because obviously they drafted C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson and Scruggs, and they're making a lot of investments into the defensive side of the ball, which is good. That's what you want because when Stroud is your quarterback, you're going to be in a lot of shootouts and you're going to be playing in a lot of high-scoring games, potentially, unless you invest into the defense. So I really like what they did in this year's draft. And D'Amico Ryans and Bobby Slowick look like a pretty good regime so far. So good job, Nick Caserio, for building this, and good job for drafting Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Dalton Schultz. They've all been great offensive acquisitions, and it's perfectly what you want from your quarterback who's currently in a Super Bowl window. Maybe their O-line plays better this upcoming year because I think that's the one thing keeping them from being a truly elite team. Now, we're in the dog tier. GMs that I hold in very high regard and GMs that I really like. And if I was starting a franchise today, these are the 6 GMs that I would really like and I would want to take over my franchise. So when I think about Les Snead, his reputation was that he was just a guy obsessed with trading away picks before they won the Super Bowl because they traded for Cooks, they traded for Stafford, and they traded for Ramsey. Not in that order, but regardless, his reputation was, okay, he's an irresponsible GM until they won the Super Bowl, but they've been really good at finding hits late. They found guys like Cooper Kupp, they found guys like Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams, Kobe Turner, and just a bunch of other guys in the secondary. Kobe Durant as well. McVay was one of the best head coaching hires of all time, so I don't know if Les Snead in particular was the one who hired him there. I don't know if like Kroenke was on like the head coach searching committee, but McVay is pretty much laying the groundwork for how teams want to hire, and he was really what made the league shift to pretty much an exclusively hiring offensive coaches philosophy. Um, but they've played in the NFC West, and the 49ers and Seahawks and Cardinals at points have all been really good, while Les Snead has been the GM of the Rams. And the Rams have kind of always held their own against them too, but they took a while to get going in the Les Snead era, but they've been very successful. Remains to be seen what it's going to look like once they finally are ready to move on from Stafford, or Stafford decides to retire, because it kind of sounds like he's on borrowed time. But regardless, big ups Les Snead. Now, Eric DeCosta, one thing that comes to mind about the Ravens is they draft guys that are just ready to kick your ass no matter where you are. It could, like, I remember when the mid-2010s were going on, they could roll up in New England and absolutely blow the doors off the Patriots, and nobody would be surprised because they want guys who play like Ravens. You know, that's their whole mantra, and he's been pretty clean. Like, I can't remember any, like, huge busts that Baltimore has had. Obviously, they've drafted Zay Flowers, who looks great, Kyle Hamilton, Tyler Linderbaum, and they're now a model of how they want to run a team. All their coaches are getting poached. All their executives are getting poached. And Harbaugh is a great hands-off leader. He kind of reminds me of Mike Tomlin, but just a little bit better, and the team is more talented. But the sad thing about the Ravens is that this team has not been a model of consistency. I don't know if something's wrong with M&T Bank Field, but regardless, they've done a great job building around Lamar. Their offensive linemen consistently get signed to second contracts by, if not by them, but with other teams. But they play in the AFC North. Every game's a bloodbath. Every team hates each other, and the Lamar breakout in 2019 was aided by a lot of people around the Ravens organization. Now, I know Eric DeCosta took over that team in the 2019 offseason from Newsom, but regardless, you could tell that he learned very well. He carries that mantra with him of playing like a Raven and, you know, finding guys who are just Ravens, but not just football players. And yeah, I really like what they're able to do. Very good team at developing their talent. Yeah, and I really respect the Ravens organization and Eric DeCosta. So, 49ers, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. So, they can develop skill position players in an unbelievable way. Like, Shanahan has his school of wide receiver development where you're really fast and they really like your traits, but then they doghouse you and then you turn into a superstar. At least that's what happens. I don't know with Ayuk, but they can also develop front seven players like no other team. I know they've poured a lot of resources into their front seven because it's just kind of called for it. Solomon Thomas didn't really work out as the first pick of the organization, but then they drafted Mike McGlinchey, and he did not end up signing with the 49ers again. But after that, Nick Bosa, Javon Kinlaw, who also didn't end up being, you know, what they thought they were getting, but Brandon Ayuk, home run. But they've had so many other great picks within that time frame that I don't think it'd be fair to judge them just off of that. And they've acquired guys like George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, and they ended up trading for Christian McCaffrey in the middle of 2022 as well. And the fact that they missed on Trey Lance, but the team is so good that it doesn't matter, really says a lot about this organization. They should have won, like, if we're being honest, they probably should have won at least one Super Bowl by now, ever since 2021. Like, you could argue, yeah, they should have won in 2020 as well, but I do think the Chiefs were the best team this year. In this past year, the Super Bowl was there for the taking, but I don't know. And that's why I say the cracks in the depth are starting to show, because they did not have the guys on the offensive line to be able to block the Chiefs' front seven. They did not adjust to the Chiefs' blitz-heavy game plan. They did not adjust to the Chiefs' man-heavy game plan. And a lot of routes where Ayuk should have been lined up in a certain place that Deebo was, it just didn't pan out in their favor. But Purdy at Mr. Relevant was an absolute heist. I believe he's still only making $550K a year, so good for him. But this team is built to play with a lead, and their run defense is not that good, but I think that's why their pass rush and their secondary are so good. is because they're built to play with the lead. But regardless, John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, definitely a good front office, definitely a well-run organization. And yeah, so number 3, the Lions with Brad Holmes. And the reason why these guys are ranked higher is because, yeah, the 49ers didn't start with a lot, but the Lions started with even less. And they haven't really had any true misses besides Jameson Williams. And in my opinion, overdrafting Jahmyr Gibbs, but you know what? It looks fantastic so far. But they made the Lions a place where everybody in America could cheer for. Like, it is almost impossible to hate this team unless you are a Packers, Vikings, or Bears fan. Everybody was cheering for the Lions in the Final Four this year. And they've made a reputation of just doing absolutely asinine things during the draft. Like, do you guys remember when they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs 12th overall, what the whole NFL world was thinking? And I thought they should have gotten a lot more flack for trading up for Jameson Williams, but he could still happen, but I wouldn't expect it. But yeah, they did move on from Jamal Williams and give that role to Demont as well, so they also upgraded in that department, and they really, really found a great tight end in Sam Laporta, and they've probably built the best offensive line in football. Now they still need help in the secondary, and that was shown by the fact that they used their first-round pick on Arnold, but yeah, I don't know. This team just drafts very well late. Like, Amon-Ra St. Brown, one of the game's very best wide receivers. Barnes, McNeil, Joseph Rodriguez, all guys who can contribute to the Detroit Lions. And obviously, you have guys like Penei Sewell, Aiden Hutchinson, and Jahmyr Gibbs, as well as Sam Laporta. That's kind of your core. And they got Jared Goff, and they developed him again. The reputation for Goff when he got traded from the Rams was that he couldn't put on his helmet without Sean McVay's help. But it seems like he loves playing for the Lions, and that they really embraced him. And getting him for $50 million a year, crazy to say this, but it's a steal. It's a steal for what they have built. So Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell, absolute studs. Now we're getting into Howie Roseman, and you guys know who's number 1 now, but here is why Howie Roseman is not number 1. I was really worried about what this team is going to look like in 2020 because this team had a core and then it got completely ripped out from underneath them. But Howie Roseman, he was kind of the first one to lay the groundwork of how modern teams should think about how to, construct their rosters. And he was the first one to be like, okay, you can convert all this salary cap stuff, you can convert it into roster bonuses. And this is a guy who, as soon as you think you're done building the trenches, you build some more. And I do think that they could have not signed Carson Wentz to that contract in 2019. And I think a lot less people would be clowning on them for when they did sign Jalen Hurts. But they do have a lot of numerous high risk or high upside, no risk signings. So that's good for them. They definitely developed their talent as well, especially on the defensive line. But he built the Eagles, then they won the Super Bowl, and then he rebuilt the Eagles. And he's been to 2 Super Bowl appearances with within 5 years with different cores. The first year was with Nick Foles and just a lot of those guys, and the identity of that team was centered around their pass rush and like Fletcher Cox and all that. And a lot of the guys from the first Super Bowl Eagles core was still left over in the second Philadelphia Eagles core, but I don't know. Even then, you did have some new blood. You had guys like Jalen Hurts, Devontae Smith, and A.J. Brown, and just a lot of other guys who weren't there when you did end up making the Super Bowl. But yeah, and then what does he do in the 2022 offseason? He acquires the Saints 2023 first by trading back and making them pay up for Chris Olave. And he used that for leverage to draft Jalen Carter. So yeah, the Eagles definitely have a way to build their teams, and I do think that they're number 2 just because of how much chaos and turmoil there was in that organization for a few years there. But big ups to Howie Roseman. Now, I'm not sure if Reed is the GOAT GM. I'm not sure if Mahomes is the GOAT QB, or I'm not sure if Reed is the GOAT head coach. I'm not sure if Mahomes is the GOAT QB, but Brett Veach is the GOAT GM, and here's why. So he built a strong foundation. His first, there's been a laundry list of athletic articles published about how they drafted Patrick Mahomes, so those are always a great watch if you guys have not seen that. And the Chiefs coaching staff, they do a great job of developing their young talent. Andy Reid can coach up rookies like no other. And they've drafted guys late like McDuffie, Humphrey, Smith, and Bolton. Not guys who are just contributors, but guys who legitimately become, top 10 contributors in the NFL at their position. And I know McDuffie was a first round pick, but all these other guys were drafted pretty late. And they know when to move on. I thought it was interesting that they paid Snead, or that they paid Jones and let Snead walk, because I thought it was going to be the other way around, just because Snead is, a few years younger. But, when I think about it, it makes sense. So, yeah, and they moved on from Tyreek Hill. And when people say the cap is a myth, like, I don't know. They had to move on from Tyreek Hill just because of this. But yeah, no question Mahomes is on a relatively team-friendly deal, but I assume he's going to get a new contract sometime soon. But yeah, one thing about this team also is that their weaknesses always get addressed, and aggressively. Like, for example, in 2022, after they won the Super Bowl against the Eagles, I was a little surprised that they ran it back with Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney, and um, Marquez Valdez-Scantling again as their wide receiver core. But at the same time, I was also surprised in 2020 when they made the Super Bowl with a duct tape offensive line, uh, with the ghost of Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz. And what did they do the next two off seasons? In 2021, the 2021 off season, they draft Humphrey. They sign Joe Tooney. They draft Smith. And then what did they do this past year? They sign Hollywood Brown, and they trade up for Xavier Worthy in the draft. But yeah, I do think Brett Veach is the GOAT GM. So yeah, that basically does it for me. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.